When we talk about the absolutely massive Star Trek universe, where humanity, along with science and empathy, aim to reach for the stars, we cannot forget that there is one being who's much different from the rest. So much so that you might call him the ultimate contradiction. Yup, we're talking about none other than Q. For many, he's a trickster who just keeps coming back to cause problem after problem, but if you dig deeper, you're going to find there's a lot more to Q than meets the eye. As it turns out, Q's greatest struggle isn't what you might expect, as he has almost infinite power and doesn't need any more. His struggle is one for meaning. He exists beyond just flesh and blood, starships and warp drives, yet he's unable to be truly free. And that's really just the beginning. Understanding a character like Q means understanding how a mind like his maintains its form, its identity, and its purpose inside a reality Q can change on a whim. That's what today's video is all about, so allow me to welcome you to the anatomy and origins of Q, the Star Trek god who got bored. Now, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Here we go. So first things first, what is Q? Well, he's a member, and more often a problem, for the Q continuum. Now, what is the Q continuum? Well, that's where things get complicated. It's probably best described as a state of existence, a dimension of pure consciousness that a race of living beings achieved after transcending physical reality ages ago. And they left behind biological evolution altogether, as they no longer require physical forms that age and die. Instead, they adopted a shared consciousness, and it's quite an omnipotent one in nature, and this has caused them to become beings of pure thought and will. Even though we know all of this, their origin story still feels shrouded in mystery and contradiction. Q himself has claimed that the Q have always existed, but at the same time, he's a famously unreliable narrator. There's also other hints, including some from other Q, that suggest that they evolved from humanoid beings a long time ago. This idea is actually central to the Q's anatomy, as they represent the final step of evolution, where you've got a species that moves beyond the need for a body. They're no longer made of cells or organs, and they need to be studied via their thoughts, memory, and collective willpower, all of which are strong enough to reshape reality completely. Simply put, for the Q, the continuum is their body, their society, and their prison all at the same time. They traded the struggles of a physical life for an endless session of boredom as part of a collective existence. This origin is one of the better theories that explains everything about Q's behavior. From his immense power, which is a symptom of his evolved state, to his childlike mischief and interest in chaos, being a direct result of having escaped the very struggles that define life and even give it meaning. But now that we've covered that the Q have given up their physical forms, it begs the question, do they have a physical presence at all? Well, you see, the Q have no physical bodies by default, at least not in the same way a human or Klingon does. The humanoid form that Q most often uses is that of a man in a Starfleet uniform, with the mischievous smile of actor John Delancey being a literal costume. It's a piece of theater he chose for the benefit of what he refers to as lesser beings, particularly the humans he often interacts with. And when he appears on the bridge of the Enterprise, he is seen to be projecting an image that their minds can process as well as understand. The real Q exists as nothing but consciousness without any form at all. He can take any shape he desires, be it object, energy pattern, or even concept. It can get really absurd at times, as he once appeared as a serious military sergeant to test Captain Janeway. The Q continuum itself, when shown to humans, once appeared as a dusty road with a rundown gas station. Now, this isn't just a metaphor that human brains can grasp, it also raises a crucial point about their anatomy. Form is not, and never has been, a limitation for Q, but in reality, it's more of a language tool that he uses to communicate. He chooses a humanoid shape because it allows for dialogue, for expression, and for provoking emotional reactions. His body is a conscious decision, and it basically means his fundamental anatomy cannot be physical at all. Q's identity allows him to suit himself with any mask he wishes to wear. But for a being like Q, anatomy cannot mean a heart, lungs, or even a brain. These are tools for a biological being who's confined to a single timeline and a single point in space. Q's anatomy must be defined differently, as his consciousness, identity, and literal self linger across infinite possibilities. First, there's the structure of his consciousness. His mind is such that it is deeply linked to the Q continuum, which, as you know, is a vast network of similar beings, instead of him having a solitary mind of his own. Second, there is the persistence seen in his identity. In spite of living for billions of years and witnessing the birth and death of stars, Q remains recognizably Q. He's still an arrogant, curious, theatrical being obsessed with humanity. Finally, there's the continuity of his self. You see, Q experiences all time at once. His past, present, and future are not a straight line, therefore, his anatomy must include a system that keeps him from dissolving into a whirlpool of chaos from every moment simultaneously. All of this internal architecture of his is what holds him together. This is more important to his existence than having a skeleton or even a nervous system. It's important to bear in mind that Q perceives time as an ocean and he can dive in at any point. He experiences the idea that one event causes another as a pattern that simpler beings follow. This is perhaps the most fundamental point that separates his cognitive anatomy from that of a human. For Captain Picard, life is a journey with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Choices matter because they lead to consequences that cannot be undone. For Q, all moments exist at the same time. He sees the beginning of humanity, its potential futures, and every messy step in between all at once. This fundamentally explains his behavior as well. His boredom is completely understandable because when you've seen everything that will happen, what is left that could actually surprise you? This leads to Q's mischief as well. For example, an instance where he sent the Enterprise to meet the Borg before they were ready, and that seems really cruel from a linear perspective. But from Q's viewpoint, he's just adjusting a timeline by providing a necessary nudge to make sure of a better outcome in the future. This non-linear perception is like the lens through which he views all of reality, and this makes him a true alien being, even when he looks very much like a human. But while Q seems to be all-powerful when compared to humans, there are some constraints he has to face with his omnipotence, all of which are enforced by the Q continuum. This establishes a key rule of his existence. In Star Trek, even godhood has laws and society. The continuum here acts as a governing body for beings of absolute power. They can and have stripped Q of his powers entirely and made him mortal and vulnerable, as seen when he was cast out in the episode titled Deja Q. They can even exile members as well as execute them, as they did with Amanda Rogers' parents, for breaking the rules by using their powers while living as humans. Q is also bound by internal rules and principles that he rarely admits. These constraints are key to his anatomy, as they act like his immune system as well as the skeletal structure of his existence. Without the continuum's rules, a being like Q could devolve into a chaotic mess, and it could even result in him losing his entire identity. The limitations imposed by his peers give his infinite power a shape and a direction. They force him to channel his abilities through games, lessons, and manipulations, which in turn gives him a delicate connection to the meaning he seems to seek so desperately. Now, since we're talking about the vulnerable and weaker sides of Q, you should know that he doesn't feel physical pain, nor does he experience fear as humans would understand it. His form cannot be injured in a conventional sense. However, he is capable of going through a great deal of distress when his existence is threatened. What we mean is that in a case where the continuum stripped him of his powers and he became human, during that time Q felt cold, hunger, fear, and physical pain from attacks. This was a catastrophe for him. His normal mode of existence, which renders him a protected consciousness that can control reality, was rewritten in a way that made him a biological and fragile being, which he described as terrifying and disgusting. Tell me about it, dude. On top of that, Q can experience existential fear. You see, the idea of boredom within the continuum drove one Q, named Quinn, to seek death. In Star Trek Picard, Q faces his own impending death, which is a concept that should be impossible for an immortal, but he displays a deep fear of the end of his existence. These moments are phases of failure for Q's character. These things reveal that beneath the godlike facade he betrays, there is a very unprepared side to his identity that suffers when its preferred state of being is compromised. The fear of ceasing to be Q has him hesitating about his whole existence. Now, let's move on to what he requires to keep existing. Q doesn't need water, food, air, or even sleep to sustain himself. In that sense, his existence is self-sustaining and eternal by nature. He's a closed system consisting of only thought and power. However, he may require something more abstract to fuel him, something like continuity of purpose. The evidence suggests that without a project, a game, or a point of interest, Q's existence becomes unbearable. The Q continuum is depicted as a place where nothing new ever happens. Q seeks out humanity, and Captain Picard in particular, in order to feel things like challenge and growth. He needs to witness struggle, progress, and moral choices because he has none of his own. So while he doesn't need physical mode to drive his life, his consciousness seems to require a sort of engagement with the linear universe to stave off a kind of madness that may arise out of infinitely empty time. His endless life must be filled with something, or it may start to feel like a prison, and hence he treats humanity as a sort of way to sustain himself. But if he fears death and worries about sustaining himself, wouldn't he want to have someone to continue on his legacy, in the biological sense perhaps? Well, the reproduction of the Q has little to do with biology. It's more about the continuity of their consciousness. A new Q can come into being in several ways, proving that its anatomy can replicate. Firstly, the Q can request a new and fully formed Q come into existence, as when Q threatened to replace Amanda Rogers if she refused to join the continuum. Secondly, Q can have offspring. The female Q had a son, whom she and Q raised, who was born with all the powers of a Q. Thirdly, and perhaps the most intriguing, a human can evolve into a Q, believe it or not. Amanda Rogers was born to Q parents, living as humans, and her powers eventually emerged naturally. Additionally, the comics suggest that humanity's ultimate destiny may be to evolve into the Q. This frames reproduction as a passing of the torch and suggests the Q continuum is nothing but a state of being that other consciousnesses can achieve. This ability to create more of their kind, or to welcome evolved beings, is part of their system within their collective anatomy. It allows for renewal as well as change within a supposedly perfect existence, as it offers a potential escape from eternal boredom. Now, let's take a second to talk about morality, and in the case of Q's godlike anatomy, his invulnerability, immortality, and non-linear perception, all of which usually distort his sense of morality and ethics. From his perspective, the moral dilemmas that define human life are tiny and temporary puzzles. He feels a sense of responsibility for species, timelines, and abstract concepts like potential. Empathy, in the human sense of sharing another's immediate pain, is almost impossible for him. When he caused the deaths of Enterprise crew members during the first Borg encounter, he saw it as a necessary cost for a greater strategic lesson in a way that would save 1 billion lives later. His abilities allow him to feel removed from the consequences, or at least thinking about them, and this allows him to act in ways that seem cruel, petty, and even random at times. Yet there are some glimmers of a moral code if you're looking closely. The continuum punishes misuse of power. As a result, Q himself shows moments of gratitude, like when he gave Data the gift of laughter, or a twisted sense of fairness, as when he tried to repay a debt to Picard. His morality is simply built on a scale with a perspective that's too difficult to understand for beings who live, love, and die in a straight line. Now, you may have noticed that his character has a persistent fixation on humanity. This is mainly because they represent a contradiction to his being, and this fascinates him. Humans are a biological species, along with being messy and emotional, but they also possess a drive to explore, to improve, and to transcend their limits, which he finds himself gravitating towards. In many ways, humanity is a mirror of what the Q might have been eons ago. They're caught between their animal past and a potential future that might even rival the Q. This makes them the perfect subject for his experiments as well as his amusement. Picard, the best of humanity, is the ideal focal point for Q, who tries to do a comparative study of the two different anatomies. He's studying a species that still has a linear anatomy, but whose consciousness strives for more. He's watching evolution happen in real time and perhaps even guiding it to see if they will make the same choices his people did, or perhaps even better ones. With Jack Crusher, Picard's son, he sees the next generation of this potential. Humanity, to Q, is amusing, as he understands how meaning is built from struggle, which is something his own perfect existence lacks altogether. All in all, Q isn't a god who toys with mortals for his own entertainment. His character is that of a tragic figure, as this is someone who is trapped by the infinity he's achieved. His anatomy is magnificent to study, and his consciousness, freed from body, time, and death, has rid him of everyday and ordinary struggles. This leaves him with only one key regular battle, which is the soul-crushing battle against boredom. In Star Trek, a franchise about growth and hope, Q exists as a constant reminder who shows us that power without limit isn't as ideal as some people may think, and surely not the sort of ultimate freedom you'd wish to attain. Rather, it's more like a beautiful cage. You see, true power may not lie in controlling reality. It may lie within living within constraints, feeling pain, and earning joy. All of these sensations our Q can only imagine and forever envy from his lonely throne of stars. And that's our video for today. We hope you had a great time as we broke down the intense anatomy of this iconic Star Trek character. Q is an all-powerful god, but he also has limitations, which puts a kind of contradiction into his existence, which suggests that everything might not be ideal once you've transcended reality, time, and emotions. This fascinating character study makes us rethink what we assume to be perfect and begin appreciating the little things that keep fueling our mortal lives. Now let us know your thoughts on the incredibly twisted cues and how you view them in the comments section down below. Until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.